Gmar Chatima Tova. We have been spending a little bit of time over the trajectory from Rosh Hashanah into Yom Kippurim, dwelling with this cedar and reed imagery that we get from Gemara. The cedar, the paragon of strength; the reed, the exemplar of flexibility. And when it is that we ourselves, as a Jewish people, might defer or toggle or select one or the other as our way of being in the world. So how does this cedar and reed paradigm affect how we talk about Israel? That's right, we're going to talk about Israel for a little bit. I agree. And to that point, just so you know, this drash actually changed 2 days ago and yesterday. And even before that, it wasn't even necessarily easy to talk about Israel, in part because the consequences of doing so wrong or poorly are fierce. And so just a word of gratitude to some of our leaders within our community who have been fellow travelers and conversation partners with me through this, who have served as an invitation to this conversation, as bad as it is in the American Jewish landscape. I'm not talking about Beth Shalom or Wilmington, Delaware, or anything that is specific and peculiar to right here. I'm talking about the ways in which we as a Jewish people are struggling to talk about Israel. Let me explain a little bit about that. It was earlier this year, and I was in conversation, I think it might have been with Michelle Silberglied, but I'm not positive, that nothing exactly in my 11 years now as a rabbi has made me feel the way that the Israel discourse has right now. I worry if I'm actually enough to be able to hold a collective Jewish conversation just in our community around Israel. And here's the thing, I'm looking around and it's not like I'm seeing rabbis growing on trees who are awesome at this, because I'm kind of worried that this conversation on Israel is bringing cracks to our and fissures to our foundations, that there are ways in which it has ruptured elements of what it means to be one Jewish people in this moment. And not for nothing, the conversation's moving so fast that, like I said, what I wrote over the last several months, I had to tweak and amend and play with over just the last few days. So here we are. I'm going to start with a story, and I have permission to use this story in this way from this particular fellow traveler of mine. Recently, a few weeks ago, I gave an improvised drash around a friend of mine who served in the Israeli military. His name is Roy Yerushalmi. He is a wonderful, close friend of mine. He and I played in a band together in Israel back in 2008, and after that, he wound up giving me his jacket from the IDF as well as his beret, his kumta. I have it here, less as a signifier of any kind of military service that I've done, but more as this thing that reverberates and holds my friendship with Roy. So he's a few years older than me, just for context. He served in combat in Lebanon, South Lebanon. October 8th, the day after the war started, Roy Yerushalmi volunteered for his reserve unit. He showed up in uniform, ready to go for his reserve unit, and they laughed him right out because he was too old. He said, "Come on, man, what are you doing here?" So he went home, where he operates a cafe, Pinat Yerushalmi in Telmond, and he started cooking meals and bringing them to the front. So I offered a couple of weeks ago in this improvised drash, blessing that everybody in this conflict should have enough to eat. Following that blessing that I offered, someone in our community shared with me that, hey, maybe that was actually really obscene of me to talk about the IDF having enough to eat when there's starvation in Gaza. And so that's where I'm stuck. Do I have words that are perfect enough to encapsulate my Jewish pride and love and connection with Israel, as expressed really not in terms of ideology, but in terms of my buddy Roy, frontman from my band back 2008. Do I have words to hold that set of realities of Roy and Almog, another buddy of mine, and a place that I love, in full knowledge and view and contrast of the cost of the continuation of the war at this time and what that concretely really means against values I hold sacred? So this person who told me that it was obscene to drosh in that way, I told that person I hear them. I said, I'm sorry that what I said didn't work for you. And I get that it's a little bit qualified as far as apologies go, but it was honest in terms of the anguish that I feel, that I don't have words as a rabbi to encapsulate this moment of struggle, to hold different and opposing and clashing realities and rhetorical positions together, that I actually feel an enormous degree of anguish. As I look, I feel anguish at what was done to Israel, at the cost of what the Israeli military has been commanded to do, and our inability to hold all of those things together all over the world, and here just as Jews in scenic, sunny Wilmington, Delaware. So I told this person, this congregant, this fellow traveler of mine, and I would go so far as to say this friend, how awful it is. And that I'm kind of not sure how to speak to the needs of defending the Jewish people right now and Israel, while also speaking to humanitarian concerns from whoever it is we might deem the other in the course of this thing. And if you think I'm talking about Palestinians here, I am. But I'm also not. I'm also talking about other Jews. So here's a big question, one among several, but really one of the big ones that keeps me awake at night right now, is who are we erasing or negating or silencing within our own community from left or right or whatever? Who are the Jews that we're actually condemning in the course of this conversation? If I'm going through this as your rabbi, I'm willing to guess that you actually probably have myriad examples you can call to mind too. Something you saw on Facebook, social media, something a friend said, or a former and ex-friend based on how that conversation went. Something from the news, because it's really hard right now. So here's what I'm not here to do today. I'm not going to stand here and draw a line in the sand or tell you where to draw it, okay? But I'm thinking about the difference in how the ancient rabbis and sages talked about sin versus heresy. Sin is doing the wrong thing, okay? Cool, we understand that much. You've done wrong. Here we all are at Yom Kippur. This is what this is for. But heresy is doing the wrong thing with an idea or intentionality that constitutes a broader threat to me and my own. In other words, I can be in community with people with whom I disagree, even people who I believe are wrong. Not to be glib, but it's cool with me if you're wrong. But when does it rise to something else? That's that sin and heresy question. When does another Jew being wrong wind up posing a threat to me? When do we hit that level where the other, even if they are Jewish, has to be rendered out? I'm not prepared to answer that question today, but the question does bring us to the edge of a precipice. This is the precipice in which when we speak of the other, when we talk about the enemy, we're talking about other Jews. So how do we manage to be a Jewish community with one another together, even in the most profound of disagreements on the day after the ceasefire? How do we walk a path in which our being right or just or carrying truth doesn't require us to excommunicate somebody else? How do we keep from deciding that the other and the enemy is actually other Jews? This isn't a new paradigm in Judaism. It's a horrifying one, but it's not new. You can see under the Altalena incident. This was in the 1940s. Pre-state Jewish militias from Haganah and the Etzel in and around the land of Israel, they fired on each other and sank a Jewish ship running guns in the Tel Aviv harbor. 19 were killed. A broader civil war was basically averted when Menachem Begin stepped in and instructed his Etzel militia to stand down. See, under the assassination of Gedaliah, we were talking about this in Hebrew school actually the other day. He was a Jewish governor in and around Judea in 582 BCE after the destruction of the first temple, just before. You may have heard of him from Tzom Gedaliah, the fast of Gedaliah, which is actually the day after the second day of Rosh Hashanah. We just passed it. And what happened? Well, Jews assassinated the Jewish governor, and again, it was the brink of civil war. Turns out we are still fasting 2,500 years later to remember this one. Or Yitzhak Rabin, 1995. I was 10 at the time, and I remember learning about it in Hebrew school. Again, a Jewish leader killed by other Jews. You can see under the destruction of the Second Temple as an entire enterprise unto itself. Why? Well, the way the rabbis understand and interpret that in the Talmud, they don't lay that at the doorstep of the Romans. Yeah, they were the ones who actually physically destroyed the thing, but the rabbis don't blame the Romans for it. The rabbis say the Second Temple was destroyed because of sinat chinam, which is Hebrew for free hatred. Because as they understand it, we hated each other. So back to the cedar and the reed. When do we need the flexibility of the reed or the strength and integrity of the cedar? That to me feels like the scary part right now. I don't know. And so against the backdrop of how hard it is to hold this communication, to hold other voices, the voices with whom we disagree, understanding whether they are simply something that we don't stand with or whether we actually want them out of our own community, even trying to ascertain that. That's a really hard one. And don't get me wrong, I imagine there will be a ceasefire. There will be the day when there isn't any longer any gunfire or military operation, whatever. But on that day, do you think we'll have figured out how to talk to each other? How to hold deeply and profound disagreements about our highest ideals as they pertain to the Jewish state? I don't know how much better we're going to be at that conversation when that day arrives. There are going to be a lot of conversations about responsibility, about accountability, and there will be plenty more opportunities for recrimination of the other. And that's even once the shooting is stopped. But may that at least be an inflection point, a turning point. May there be a just and a moral end to the conflict between Israel and her neighbors, between us and some of our neighbors as we experience anti-Semitism and some of the news of this morning. A cease to some of the hatreds and anti-Semitism. After all, not to put it lightly, but you don't make peace with your friends, you make peace with your enemies. But there's another piece of blessing here that I want to offer. It's against the backdrop of knowing what to say or knowing what to do. In some ways, I am inspired to hold the Blessed Holy One in this place. And this is the place of my own prayer. May we be a Jewish community that not only survives finding that ceasefire, but dwells and exists with one another. May we find justice and our own moral voices without needing to excise other Jews. I don't see a straight line to that outcome, and that scares me. But it'll take a lot of Torah and wisdom and justice and integrity to carry us to that outcome when we can dwell within sacred community together. Pray that God grants us, all of us here today, all the way in the back, the wisdom to find that outcome of what it means to dwell in sacred community together. That we can find a little bit of, as we discussed yesterday, that white fire, the blank space in and around the page of Torah, to accompany the black fire of our known and sure texts. So, what about my fellow traveler, this congregant with whom I have shared this interaction? This person, by the way, even with that disagreement, we're still in Jewish community together. I got their permission to share this story. In fact, sometime after Yom Kippur, probably after Sukkot too, that person is planning on coming over sometime so I can give him a hand with this project. We're still, I would want to suggest, friends. I don't know that we'll agree by that point, but we're still fellow travelers. And so I want to tell you how that conversation ended, actually. Having shared that what I had said was a real problem for this person in our community, and then I said in response to that, I shared, yeah, I know, I feel deeply anguished about that, and I don't totally know how to do that. And this congregant said to me, you know, I feel your anguish. I feel the lack of clarity on how it is we keep a Jewish community together right now. Sure, there's moral imperative. To hear one another with integrity is not to surrender your values or what you believe. It's actually the thing that keeps us Jewish, is holding to those values, even when we disagree. But figuring out how to hold those values while also having some kind of space to hear something different, well, that's the part that keeps us in Jewish community. So this fellow traveler said to me, you know, I honestly worry about what our community looks like the day after a ceasefire. This person said the same thing I was articulating earlier. War won't be forever. Frankly, at this point, it might not even be a week longer. But how we will answer questions of responsibility and accountability in the coming months as a Kehillah Kadoshah, as a sacred community without rendering one another out, well, that's going to be the hard part. So I want to suggest that part of what we can see here with the cedar and the reed, this is a new valence of the reed that we haven't even discussed yet. The reed, where does it grow? Along the water's edge. It roots below the water, but it rises up out of the water. It needs to be in both states at the same time. It has to be both aquatic and rooted. We need a little bit of that ability in our conversation around Israel. We have to be able to hold the personal and the communal. We have to be able to fix what it is we see as breaking us or the failures that we're witnessing in our own day. But we have to do it in a way that we remain in community together in 5 years, let alone in 500 years. It has to live in both at the same time. So here at Yom Kippur, this place of holy inscription, in the book of life, let ours be the black fire combined with the white fire that the ancient mystics taught us is the definition of Torah in Midrash Tanchuma. Let us combine strength and integrity with flexibility and openness to hear voices and perspectives of the other. Let us be rooted in truth, but able to hear. Let us emulate and follow the example of the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Blessed Holy One. May our conversations with one another, the way that we live in relation to Israel and whole Jewish community, be a very act of writing black fire on white fire. May it be sacred truth, and may it hold space for the perspectives and the possibilities we haven't even imagined for Israel and a brighter trajectory for tomorrow. Gemar Chatima Tova.